Hello, everybody. So here we go with chapter 27. Sorry, Roman numerals, it takes me a second sometimes. Of the Count of Monte Cristo, the Apparition. Franz arranged the route in such a way that Albert might reach the Colosseum without passing a single ancient ruin, so that nothing should attract his eye till the Colosseum itself burst upon him in all its gigantic proportions. They therefore followed Via Sistina, cut across in front of the Santa Maria Maggiore, and drove along the Via Urbana by San Pietro in Vincoli until they came to the Via del Colosseo. When they arrived at the somber-looking and gigantic Colosseum, the long, pale rays of the moon were pouring through the gaping apertures in its massive walls. The carriage stopped a few yards from Meta Sudans. The coachman opened the door of the carriage, whereupon the two young men leapt out and found themselves face to face with the cicerone, who seemed to have sprung from nowhere. Franz had already visited the Colosseum some 10 times. His companion, however, had never set foot in it before, and it must be said to his credit that, in spite of the ignorant prattle of his guide, he was deeply impressed. And indeed, no one who has not beheld it can have any idea of the majesty of a ruin such as this, with its proportions magnified by the mysterious clearness of the southern moon, which darts forth rays that are like fantasy from the eastern twilight. Scarcely had Franz, the pensive one, gone 100 yards under the inner portals, however, when he left Albert to his guide, who would not renounce his prescriptive right to show him all around the lion's den, the loggia of the gladiators, the podium of the Caesars. Ascending a half-dilapidated staircase, Franz seating himself in the shadow of a column facing a niche, which gave him an all-embracing view of the gigantic dimensions of this majestic ruin. He had been sitting thus for about a quarter of an hour when he seemed to hear a stone rolling down the staircase opposite the one by which he had ascended. It was no strange matter for a stone, loosened by age, to break away, but it seemed to Franz that this stone had been displaced by the pressure of a human foot, and that the sound of a muffled footstep reached his ears. He was not mistaken. A moment later, a man appeared, and from the hesitating manner in which he came up the last few steps and stopped at the top, apparently listening, it was obvious he had come for some particular purpose and was expecting to meet someone. Instinctively, Franz withdrew behind his column. The individual whose mysterious arrival had attracted his attention stood partly in the shadow of the ruins, so that Franz was unable to distinguish his features, although the details of his dress were plainly discernible. He wore a large, dark brown cloak, one end of which was thrown over his left shoulder in such a way as to hide the lower part of his face, while a broad-brimmed hat concealed the upper part. He had been standing there for some minutes and began to show visible signs of impatience when another man appeared. "I crave your pardon for keeping you waiting, Excellency," he said with a Roman accent. "I am, however, but a few minutes late. It has just struck 10 by the clock on Saint Jean Latran. I have just come from the castle of Saint D'Angelo and had great difficulty in seeing Beppo." Who is Beppo? Beppo is employed in the prison, and I pay him a small fee every year for information as to what is going on in His Holiness's palace. "Ha ha! I see you are a prudent man." "Why, just so, Excellency. One never knows what may happen. One day I may be entrapped like poor Peppino, and shall also be in need of a rat to gnaw the cords that keep me prisoner. Come to the point, what news did you glean?" "There will be 2 executions on Tuesday at 2 o'clock, as is customary in Rome at the commencement of all great festivals. One of the condemned men will be Mazzalatto. He is a worthless wretch who has murdered a priest that brought him up and therefore deserves no pity. The other one will be Decapitato, and he, your Excellency, is no other than poor Peppino. What can you expect, my dear friend? You have struck such terror into the pontifical government that the neighboring kingdoms that they are going to make an example of him. But Peppino does not even belong to my gang. He is a poor shepherd whose only crime consisted in supplying us with provisions, which certainly made him your accomplice. But mark the consideration that is being shown him. Instead of clubbing him to death, as they will do to you if they ever get a hold of you, they content themselves with merely guillotining him. I am in the mood to do anything and everything to prevent the execution of this poor wretch who has got himself into trouble by doing me a service. Per la Madonna! I would be a coward if I did not do something for the poor fellow." "What do you intend on doing?" I shall place a score of men round the scaffold, and the moment they bring him out, I shall give the signal, and, with daggers drawn, my men and I will throw ourselves on the guard and carry off their prisoner. That seems to me very risky. I veritably believe my plan is better than yours. What is your plan, Excellency? I shall give 10,000 piastres to a friend of mine who will arrange to have Peppino's execution delayed until next year. In the course of the year, I shall give another 10,000 piastres to someone else I know, by which means his escape from prison shall be effected. Are you sure of success? I shall do more with my gold than you and your people will do with your daggers, pistols, carbines, and blunderbusses. Leave it to me. Splendid. We will, however, keep ourselves in readiness in case your plan should fail. Certainly do as so if you like, but you can count on the reprieve. How shall we know whether you have been successful? That is easily arranged. I have hired the last 3 windows of the Café Rospoli. If I obtain the reprieve, the 2 corner windows shall be draped in yellow damask, while the center one will be hung with white damask, having a large red cross marked upon it. Excellent, but who will bring the reprieve? Send me one of your men disguised as a friar, and I will give it to him. His dress will give him access to the foot of the scaffold. There he can give the bull to the officer in charge, who will hand it to the executioner. In the meantime, however, I would advise you to let Peppino know, lest he should die of fright or go mad, which would mean that we would have gone to unnecessary expenditure on his behalf. If you save Peppino, Excellency, you may count not only on my devotion to you, but my absolute obedience. Be careful what you say, my friend. I may remind you of that one day. Shh. I hear a noise. It is unnecessary for us to be seen together. All these guides are spies and they might recognize you, and though I appreciate your friendship, I fear my reputation would suffer if they knew we were on such friendly footing. Farewell then, Excellency. I rely on you as you may rely on me. With these words, the last speaker disappeared down the stairs, while the other, covering himself more closely with his cloak, almost touched Franz as he descended to the arena by the outer steps. Just then, Franz heard his name echoing through the vaults. It was Albert calling him. 10 minutes later, the two were rumbling along toward the hotel, and Franz was listening in a very indifferent and distracted manner to the learned dissertations Albert made, in the style of Pliny and Calpurnius, on the iron-pointed nets used to prevent the ferocious beasts from springing on the spectators. He let him talk on without interruption. He wanted to be alone to think undisturbed over what had happened. The next day, Franz had several letters to write and left Albert to his own devices. Albert made the most of his time. He took his letters of introduction to their addressees and received invitations for every evening. He also achieved the great feat of seeing all Rome in one day and spent the evening at the opera. Moreover, by the time he reached his hotel, he had solved the carriage question. When the two friends were smoking their last cigar in their sitting room before retiring for the night, Albert suddenly said, "I have arranged a little surprise for you. You know how impossible it is to procure a carriage. Well, I have a wonderful idea." Franz looked at his friend as though he had no great confidence in his imagination. "We cannot get a carriage and horses, but what about a wagon and a pair of oxen?" Franz stared, and a smile of amused interest played about his lips. "Yes, a wagon and a yoke of oxen. We will have the wagon decorated, and we will dress ourselves up as Neapolitan harvesters and represent a living picture after the magnificent painting by Leopold Robert." "Bravo!" exclaimed Franz. "For once you have hit upon a capital idea. Have you told anyone about it?" "I have told our host. When I came in, I sent for him and explained to him all that I should require. He assured me that it would be quite easy to obtain everything. I wanted to have the oxen's horns decorated, but he told me it would take 3 days to do it, so we must do without the superfluity." "Where is our host now?" "Gone out in search of our things." As he spoke, the door opened, and their landlord put his head in. "Permesso?" said he. "Certainly," Franz replied. "Well, have you found the wagon and oxen for us?" said Albert. "I have done better than that," he replied in a very self-satisfied manner. "Your Excellencies are aware that the Count of Monte Cristo is on the same floor as yours. Hearing of the dilemma in which you are placed, he offers you 2 seats in his carriage and 2 seats at his window in Palazzo Rospoli." Albert and Franz exchanged looks. "But can we accept this offer from a stranger, a man we do not even know?" asked Albert. "It seems to me," said Franz to Albert, "that if this man is as well-mannered as our host says he is, he would have conveyed his invitation to us in some other way, either in writing or—" At this instant, there was a knock at the door. "Come in," said Franz. A servant, wearing a very smart livery, made his appearance. From the Count of Monte Cristo to Monsieur Franz de Epernay and the Viscount Albert de Moncrief, said he, handing 2 cards to the host, who gave them to the young man. The Count of Monte Cristo asks permission to call upon you tomorrow morning, continued the servant. He will be honored to know what hour is convenient to you. Upon my word, there is nothing to find fault with here, said Albert to Franz. Everything is as it should be. Tell the Count that, on the contrary, we shall do ourselves the honor of calling upon him. The servant withdrew. That is what I should call assaulting us with politeness, said Albert. Signor Pastrini, your Count of Monte Cristo is a very gentlemanly fellow. You accept his offer, then? Of course we do, replied Albert. Nevertheless, I must own that I regret the wagon and the harvesters, and if it were not for the window at the Palazzo Ruspoli to compensate us for our loss, I think I should revert to my first idea. What about you, Franz? The window at the Palazzo Ruspoli is the deciding point with me, too. In truth, the offer of 2 seats in the Palazzo Ruspoli reminded Franz of the conversation he had overheard in the ruins of the Colosseum, when the man in the cloak undertook to obtain the condemned man's reprieve. Were he and the Count one and the same person? He would doubtless recognize him, and then nothing would deter him from satisfying his curiosity regarding him. The next morning, Franz woke up at 8 o'clock, and as soon as he was dressed, sent for the landlord, who presented himself with his usual obsequiousness. Signor Pastrini, said Franz, is there not an execution today? There is, your excellency, but if you ask me because you wish to have a window, it is too late. No, that is not the reason, replied Franz. What I want to know is how many condemned men there are, their names and the nature of their punishment. What a bit of luck, your excellency. They have just brought me to the tavolette. What are the tavolette? They are wooden tablets put up on the corners of the streets on the evening before an execution, giving the names of the condemned men, the reason for their condemnation, and the nature of their punishment. The purpose of the notice is to invite the faithful to pray to God that he may grant the culprit's sincere repentance. I should like to read one of the tavolette, said Franz. Nothing could be easier, said the landlord, opening the door. I have had one put on the landing. Taking the tablette from the wall, he handed it to Franz. A literal translation of the wording on the tablet is as follows. It is hereby made known to all that the following will be executed in the Piazza del Popolo by order of the Roto Tribunal on Tuesday, the 22nd of February, the first day of Carnival. Andrea Rondolo, accused of the murder of the highly honored and venerable priest Don Cesare Tellini, canon of the Church of Saint Jean Letran, and Peppino, alias Rocca Priori, accused of complicity with the detestable bandit Luigi Vampa and other members of his gang. The first name shall be Mazzolato, the latter shall be Decapitato. All charitable souls are hereby entreated to pray God to grant these 2 unfortunate the grace of sincere repentance. This was exactly what Franz had heard the previous evening in the ruins of the Colosseum. Time was passing, however. It was 9 o'clock, and Franz was just going to waken Albert when, to his great astonishment, he came out of his room fully dressed. Well, now that we are ready, do you think we could go and pay our respects to the Count of Monte Cristo? Franz inquired of his host. Certainly, was the reply. The Count of Monte Cristo is an early riser, and I feel sure he has been up these 2 hours. Then do you not think we shall be committing an act of indiscretion if we call on him now? I am sure we should not. Then, Albert, if you are ready, let us go and thank our neighbor for his courtesy. They had only to cross the landing. The landlord preceded them and rang the bell. A servant opened the door. "I Signore Franceschi," said the landlord. The servant bowed and invited them to enter. They were conducted through 2 rooms, more luxuriously furnished than they had thought possible in Pastrini's hotel, and were then shown into a very elegant sitting room. A Turkey carpet covered the parquet floor, and the most comfortably upholstered settees and chairs seemed to invite one to their soft, well-sprung seats and slanting backs. Magnificent paintings intermingled with glorious war trophies decorated the walls, while rich tapestried curtains hung before the door. "If your excellencies will take a seat," said the servant, "I will let the Count know you are here." And he disappeared through one of the doors. As the door opened, the sound of a guzla reached the ears of the 2 friends, but was immediately lost. The door, being closed almost as soon as it was opened, merely permitted one swell of harmony to penetrate the room. Franz and Albert looked at one another, then the furniture, pictures, and trophies. On closer inspection, it all appeared to them even more magnificent than at first. "Well, "What do you think of it all?" Franz asked his friend. "Upon my word, I think our neighbor must be some stockbroker who has speculated on the fall of Spanish funds, or else some prince traveling incognito. Hush, hush, that is what we are going to find out, for here he comes." As he finished speaking, the sound of a door turning on its bolts was heard, and almost immediately the tapestry was drawn aside to admit the owner of all these riches. Albert advanced toward him, but Franz remained glued to his seat. He who entered was no other than the cloaked man of the Colosseum. And that is where our chapter ends. I will see you all later. Have a good one.